What happens when a seasoned journalist refuses to follow royal protocol? You see it unfold the moment Meghan Markle sits down with George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America, expecting gentle questions and polite nods, only to be met with the toughest interrogation of her post-royal career. This isn't just a celebrity interview gone wrong. It's journalistic integrity colliding head-on with manufactured victimhood, erupting into a confrontation that stunned viewers. Nationwide. The tension was clear the second Meghan walked onto the GMA set. In her signature beige outfit chosen to appear polished yet approachable, she settled into the chair with the practiced ease of someone well-versed in public image. Her smile was rehearsed, her posture relaxed, her jewelry placed with intention. Across from her sat George Stephanopoulos, his intensity barely masked behind a professional exterior. Unlike the friendly interviewers she'd become accustomed to since stepping away from royal life, he came fully prepared to address the controversies that had trailed her every move. Even the opening pleasantries couldn't hide the shift in tone. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and her replies carried a weary edge, as if she sensed this wouldn't be the promotional moment she expected. "Thank you for joining us this morning, Meghan," he began, his voice carrying that familiar calm before the storm. "You've been active with various projects and public statements. I think viewers are curious about the disconnect between your calls for privacy and your continued presence in the media spotlight." The question hit with precision. Her practiced smile flickered, barely noticeable, but unmistakable to anyone attuned to the subtle reactions of someone caught off guard. "Well, George, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what privacy means in this context," she replied, trying to steady the narrative. "When we speak about privacy, we're talking about the right to control our narrative, especially when it comes to protecting our children and our family's well-being." Stephanopoulos leaned in. "But isn't there an inherent contradiction in seeking privacy while simultaneously participating in high-profile interviews, documentaries, and public appearances? Since stepping back from royal duties, you've repeatedly discussed personal family matters." The atmosphere tightened. Meghan's media training pushed to the surface, but George wasn't playing the celebrity interview game. This was serious journalism, and he treated her like any other public figure, making bold claims. "I think people need to understand that when you're constantly misrepresented, when lies are told about you and your family, you have a responsibility to set the record straight," she said, her voice gaining an edge. "We didn't choose to engage with the media. We were forced to because of the continuous attacks." The word "forced" lingered, and George seized it with practiced precision. "Forced is an interesting word," he said, his tone sharpening while remaining professional, "because from the outside, it appears you and Harry have been quite strategic with your media engagements. The timing of your Oprah interview, for example, came while your father-in-law was dealing with health issues and your grandmother-in-law was in her final months." Here, the air thickened, Stephanopoulos' challenge hanging heavy, Meghan's composure flickering as the interview took a direction she hadn't anticipated. Some might argue that the timing was designed to maximize impact while limiting the family's ability to respond. And that was the moment the interview shifted. From uncomfortable to openly confrontational, Meghan's polished composure began to fracture. Viewers could see the real person beneath the carefully curated exterior pushing through. Her jaw tightened, her fingers clamped onto the arms of her chair, and her expression hardened. "I find it really disappointing that you would characterize our truth-telling as calculated," she said, her voice rising in pitch and intensity. "We waited years to tell our side of the story. We endured constant attacks, racist coverage, and deliberate attempts to undermine our work and our relationship. The idea that we should have stayed silent while our reputations were being destroyed is absurd." Stephanopoulos didn't back down. If anything, her defensiveness seemed to sharpen his focus. He picked up a tablet loaded with notes. "Let's talk about some of these claims," he continued. "You've made allegations that have been disputed. The Archbishop of Canterbury contradicted your claim about a secret wedding. Palace sources have pushed back on other statements. How do you respond to critics who say you've been selective with the truth?" The question landed like a direct hit. Meghan's face flushed, and for a moment she seemed genuinely stunned. This was clearly not the direction she had expected the conversation to go. "I'm sorry, are you calling me a liar?" she demanded, indignation ringing in her voice. "Because if that's what you're suggesting, we need to be very clear about what's happening here." The studio fell silent. Even the crew froze, sensing they were witnessing a defining moment. Stephanopoulos stayed calm, though there was unmistakable steel behind his eyes. "I'm not calling you anything," he said. "I'm asking you to address the discrepancies between your statements and documented facts. That's journalism asking difficult questions when things don't align." His answer only seemed to fuel her frustration. She shifted in her seat, posture defensive, ready to unleash a fierce rebuttal. But before she could, something in his expression hinted that he wasn't done, that even tougher questions were coming. The tension in the studio thickened. Meghan straightened, her last layer of composure slipping. What had been mild discomfort was now unmistakable volatility. Everyone watching knew they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed and dissected for years. "You know what, George?" she snapped, her tone both defensive and condescending. "You're pushing the same narrative the British tabloids have pushed for years. You're taking their word over mine. And honestly, I expected better from someone of your stature." Stephanopoulos didn't flinch. He'd gone toe-to-toe with world leaders. A deflection wasn't going to slow him down. "I'm not taking anyone's word," he replied evenly. "I'm presenting documented evidence and asking for your response." "That's journalism," he continued. "For example, in your Oprah interview, you said you surrendered your passport and driver's license and weren't allowed to leave the country. But we have photographic evidence of your trips to New York for your baby shower, to Canada multiple times, and other international travel during your time as a working royal. How do you reconcile that?" The question landed with precision. Meghan's eyes widened, her composure visibly shaken. This was not the interview she had expected. Asterisk. And that's when Stephanopoulos' preparation meticulous, unshakable, and razor-sharp became undeniable. That's completely taken out of context," Meghan stammered, her usual polished delivery slipping as she scrambled to regain her footing. "What I meant was that there were restrictions, protocols that had to be followed. Every trip required approval, coordination with security, strict guidelines, basically no real freedom of movement." But Stephanopoulos wasn't buying vague generalities. He glanced at his tablet again, and the way Meghan stiffened made it clear she knew. He wasn't just skimming notes, he had receipts. "That contradicts what other members of the royal family have said." He pressed. "Prince William and Catherine have spoken openly about their international travel. Their experiences describe far more autonomy than what you're suggesting. Are you saying you were treated differently?" The question cut straight to the core of one of her biggest claims. Meghan snapped back before he even finished. "Of course I was treated differently," she fired, her voice rising as her composure continued to unravel. "Do you really think the first biracial American woman to marry into that family would be treated the same? The racism, the double standards, the constant attempts to undermine everything I did, it was relentless." Stephanopoulos leaned back, almost as if he'd expected that exact response. And then his tone dropped into something even more serious. "Let's talk about those racism allegations directly. You made extremely serious claims about concerns regarding your son's skin color. But when asked for details, you've remained vague. Don't you think the public deserves specifics when allegations that serious are made?" Meghan shifted in her chair, an unmistakable sign of pressure. She was used to interviews where broad statements went unchallenged. This was not that. "I protected the people involved by not naming them," she insisted, her voice sharp. "But the conversations happened. They were deeply hurtful." Stephanopoulos didn't flinch. "But without context, without names, without any form of verification, how can the public meaningfully evaluate claims of that magnitude? Journalism requires corroboration, evidence. You're asking people to take your word on issues that serious with nothing to verify them." The challenge pushed her to a breaking point. Her face flushed red, her voice trembling with anger. "Are you seriously questioning whether I experienced racism?" she shot back. "Are you suggesting I imagined the countless articles comparing me to my sister, the different treatment, the scrutiny, the double standards? Are you saying that wasn't real?" "I'm not questioning your experiences," he responded evenly. "I'm questioning specific claims about specific incidents. There's a difference between unfair media coverage and alleging that members of the royal family made racist comments about your unborn child. Those are very different levels of accusation." That distinction set her off. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she burst out, her voice echoing across the studio. "You're splitting hairs, minimizing what I lived through, and basically calling me a liar while pretending it's journalism. This isn't journalism. This is harassment disguised as an interview." The word harassment hit the air like an electric shock. Stephanopoulos' expression hardened instantly. For a journalist with decades of credibility, someone who had grilled presidents and global leaders, being accused of harassment by a celebrity unaccustomed to real scrutiny was a line he wasn't about to let stand. And the temperature in the room dropped to freezing. The interview had officially crossed a point of no return. Thought for a couple of seconds, thorough preparation became painfully clear with every passing minute. That's completely taken out of context," Meghan stammered, her usual eloquence deserting her as the weight of specific evidence closed in. "What I meant was there were restrictions, protocols to follow. Every trip needed approval, coordination with security, strict guidelines. It made real freedom of movement impossible." He checked his tablet again, and Meghan visibly stiffened. It was obvious he hadn't come unprepared. He had documentation. "That contradicts what other royals have said," he pressed. "Prince William and Catherine have spoken about their travel with far more autonomy. Are you saying you were treated differently?" The question struck at the core of a major allegation. "Of course, I was treated differently," she snapped, her voice rising as her carefully managed calm unraveled. "Do you really think the first biracial American woman to marry into that family would be treated the same? The racism, the double standards, the attempts to undermine everything I did, it was relentless." Stephanopoulos leaned back, as if he'd expected that reply. "Let's address the racism claims directly," he said, his tone sharpening. You've made serious allegations about concerns over your son's skin color, but when pressed, you've been vague about who said what and in what context. Don't the public deserve specifics when such grave accusations are made? Meghan shifted in her chair, uncomfortable under the pressure. Her media training hadn't prepared her for this level of interrogation. I protected people by not naming them, she insisted defensively. But the conversations happened. They were deeply hurtful to Harry and me. He didn't relent. Without names, context, or corroboration, how can the public evaluate claims of that magnitude? Journalism requires verification. You're asking people to accept serious accusations without evidence. That challenge pushed her past a breaking point. Her face flushed, her voice trembled with anger. Are you seriously questioning whether I experienced racism? She demanded. Do you think I imagined the endless comparisons to my sister-in-law, the unequal scrutiny, the double standards? I'm not questioning your experiences, he replied evenly. I'm questioning specific claims about specific incidents. There's a difference between unfair coverage and alleging that family members made racist remarks about your unborn child. She erupted. This is exactly what I mean, she yelled. You're splitting hairs, minimizing my reality, and essentially calling me a liar under the guise of journalism. This is harassment, not journalism. The word landed like a shock. Stephanopoulos' face hardened. A journalist who'd confronted presidents and prime ministers wasn't about to have his integrity attacked without response. The interview had crossed a point of no return. So you're acknowledging that you were actively pursuing commercial opportunities while still claiming to be committed to royal duties? He pressed, his tone sharpening. And you did this while publicly stating that you wanted to continue serving the Queen and the Commonwealth. The question cut directly into what many critics had long believed, that Meghan's departure had been far more calculated than her public narrative suggested. Her reaction showed just how unprepared she was for this level of scrutiny. You're twisting my words, she screamed, all composure gone. You're taking everything I say and turning it into something sinister. This is exactly why we had to leave, because people like you were determined to destroy us no matter what we did. The studio fell silent except for Meghan's frantic voice and the low hum of the cameras capturing every second. Production assistants stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation run its course. Stephanopoulos, sensing she'd reached her breaking point, delivered what would become the final blow. Meghan, you've built your entire post-royal brand on being a victim of institutional racism and family betrayal. But the evidence shows a pattern of strategic decision-making, careful planning, and deliberate narrative construction that contradicts much of what you've said publicly. How do you expect the American public to trust you when the facts tell such a different story? The question hung in the air. Meghan stopped pacing and faced him, her expression a mixture of rage and wounded pride. For a moment, it looked like she might launch into another outburst. But instead, something inside her seemed to give way. I'm done, she said quietly, her voice flat. I'm absolutely done with this charade. She moved toward her chair as though to sit, but instead grabbed her purse so abruptly that items spilled onto the floor. Her movements were sharp and unsteady as she fought with the microphone clipped to her jacket, her hands shaking too hard to remove it properly. This entire interview has been a setup from the beginning, she declared, her voice rising again as she finally yanked the mic free and let it drop with a sharp crack. You never intended to have an honest conversation. You just wanted to humiliate me on live television. Stephanopoulos stayed seated, watching with the steady calm of someone who had witnessed many political meltdowns. I wanted honest answers to legitimate questions, he replied evenly. If you find that humiliating, that isn't a reflection of my intentions. It's a reflection of the contradictions in your own statements that seemed to push her past what she could handle. She straightened, glared at him with pure hatred, and delivered the line that would define the entire interview. You know what, George? You can take your legitimate questions and your documented evidence and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. I don't have to sit here and listen to this garbage from someone who's clearly been bought and paid for by the same people who've tried to destroy me for years. The accusation caught him off guard for a split second, though he maintained his professionalism. That's a very serious accusation. Meghan, do you have any evidence to support it? Or is this another example of making statements you can't substantiate? That question was the final straw. Meghan let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scream, scooped up the remaining items that had spilled from her purse, and marched toward the studio exit with such force that several production assistants had to jump out of her way. Find yourself another victim for your hit job, she threw over her shoulder as she strode toward the door. I'm done being your entertainment for the morning. At the doorway, she turned back one last time, her face still flushed with anger, her voice cutting cleanly through the silent studio. And for the record, everything I said about that family and that institution is true. The fact that you'd rather believe a bunch of palace bureaucrats and racist tabloid journalists over a woman who lived through it says everything anyone needs to know about who you really are. With that final statement, Meghan Markle pushed through the studio doors and disappeared from sight, leaving behind a stunned silence that lingered long after she was gone. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Stephanopoulos sitting alone at the desk. His expression a mix of professional composure and genuine astonishment at what had unfolded. After several long seconds, he looked directly into the camera and delivered the line viewers would replay for days. "Well," he said with his usual understatement, "that certainly wasn't the conversation we were expecting to have this morning. We'll be right back after these messages." The moment the show cut to commercial, the studio erupted with murmurs and whispered excitement from crew members who knew they'd just witnessed television history. What was meant to help restore Meghan Markle's public image had instead turned into a demonstration of how quickly a carefully crafted narrative could crumble under direct questioning. The confrontation had ended, but its impact would echo across the media world for months. Proof that even the most polished public figures could not avoid accountability when faced with a journalist unwilling to play by their rules.